welcome back to another video from Tabletop Gamers. My name is Kyle, and today we're going to be talking about some general tips to improve our play in the game Dutch Blitz. But before I get into those tips, I do want to give a theme for all of my tips, so kind of a general overview. So researchers say that the human brain can only handle about 4 things at a time when it's considering, thinking and analyzing things. That's not a whole lot of things. And for those of you that have played Dutch Blitz, you know that Dutch Blitz is a very fast-paced game with lots of things to consider. Definitely more than 4 things to consider. And it can be overwhelming at times. So all of these strategies are really focused on prioritization in the game of Dutch Blitz to help improve your gameplay. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about my first tip here. So tip number 1 is going to be focusing on the Blitz pile. So for those of you that are unaware, the Blitz pile is the pile of 10 cards that sets on the table, and when this pile is exhausted or emptied out, you yell Blitz and it ends the round. The other pile, and this one I actually didn't know, I had to look this one up. The other pile that you hold and you count 3 out and flip, that pile is called the wood pile. So the reason why in my first tip you should focus on the Blitz pile over the wood pile if you are given the choice, or if you have to divert your thinking in one way or the other, is because each card in the Blitz pile is actually worth more points than the cards in the wood pile. And here's why. The Blitz pile cards are actually worth 3 points, and this card, the wood cards, are only worth 1 point. When you have a card left over in the Blitz pile, it's considered -2 points. So if you want to think about it in this way, everyone at the table starts out at -20 points at the beginning of the game. Before any cards are put out, everyone's at -20 points. If I take a card off of the Blitz pile and I have it on the board, it is 1 point added to me because every card you put on the table is worth 1 point. But not only did I gain a point by putting it out on the table, I also took away 2 of the negative points that were in this deck here. So by moving just 1 card from the Blitz pile onto the table, I have gone from -20 points to -17 points. So do you see how these cards are worth more than these cards? Because they're actually worth 3 points instead of 1. So if I'm going to have to use my brain power to be focused on only a certain number of things on the board, I want to give priority to my Blitz pile and my 3 cards that are also set here on the table. So because these cards are worth 3 points, and therefore they are worth more to me on the piles than the wood pile cards. So that's tip number 1. Tip number 2 is to focus on the cards that are of lower number in the early game. It is not likely that you're going to see a pile quickly get up to 6 through 10 in the early part of the game. So when you're flipping through, say, your wood pile cards and you're putting them down and you get like a 9, there's no point in pausing, checking the table to see if there's any availability for 9s of that color, because the chances are extremely low that that would be the case. So instead of focusing your brain power on cards that are 6 through 10, you want to instead only devote your thinking, your focus, to cards numbered 1 through 5, because they are more likely to see an opportunity on the board than those higher number cards early on in the game. So that's what I would do. Again, we only focus on 4 things at a time according to researchers with our brains. So we want to really fill those slots up with lower number cards early on in the game. Then of course we kind of switch things a little bit in the late game, although lower number cards can still be available or put out onto the table even in the late game too. So things kind of become even more difficult and more to focus on later in the game. So let's move on to tip number 3 then. So for tip number 3, we're going to be scanning the board before the game even begins. This is something that is simple, but people forget to do. You should look at what cards are available, what information you can gather from the other players before the round begins. Because like right now, you can't quite see this, but I have a yellow 2 that is available to me. Now, there could be somebody out on the board that has a yellow 1. So this is something I want to pay attention to early on and wait for them to get that out so I can quickly get my yellow 2 onto the board as well, because it could be possible that somebody else also has a yellow 2 that would quickly take that spot, and then I would have to wait for the next available pile if it ever comes, because sometimes certain colors just don't show up on the board until way late in the game, or don't even show up at all, because that's the way that Dutch Blitz works sometimes. So it's important to pay attention to that. Also, I have a blue 1 and a blue 4 on the table right now. So it's possible that when I move my blue 1 out, I'll want to be ready with my blue 4, because it could be that somebody else has a blue 2 and somebody else has a blue 3, and it'll quickly stagger up to a 4, and I'll want to be able to get that card out too as soon as possible so that somebody else doesn't take that slot. And that's only going to happen if I am paying attention to the board and I can kind of judge on what moves my opponents are going to do early on in the game, and then schedule my prioritization of the cards that I've got so that it fits my projected or planned, predicted, I guess a better word for it, predicted play patterns of my opponents. So that would be tip number 3, is scan the board and see what everybody else is likely to do when the game starts. And then for my 4th and final tip, sometimes things just go bananas in this game, and there are just hands flying and things are just dropping everywhere, and it can become overwhelming when you don't have that happening for you and instead your opponents have it happening for them. And in those moments, what you'll want to do is you'll want to take a pause, because so many things are happening at once. You're going to want to take a pause and just look at the board and instead focus on your blitz pile again, so that you can see if there's any opportunities for you when the landscape of the board is changing so quickly. You don't want to have to be counting up 3s and stuff like that in your wood pile while all this stuff is happening, because you might miss something. And so again, for tip number 4, go back to looking at the piles and seeing if anything from here, because they are worth more points, if you can get any cards in there while the chaos is happening on the table. And so that concludes my 4 tips for Dutch Blitz. If you have any tips that help you in the game Dutch Blitz, please leave a comment down below this video so that we can all gather wisdom from your experiences as well. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and catch us on the next one. Thank you for watching.